Last year, Germany shut down more industrial capacity than any point since World War II. Not because of a recession, not because of a financial crisis, because the math stopped working. And the strangest part? Every single company that left made the right decision. That's not a contradiction. That's the problem. When every rational actor in a system makes the right individual choice, and the collective outcome is catastrophic, you're looking at a structural failure. And structural failures don't fix themselves. Germany didn't decline. Germany exported itself. Now here's where most analysis goes wrong, and it goes wrong immediately. The version you've probably heard: cheap Russian gas disappeared, energy got expensive, industry left. That's true, but useless as an explanation. Think about it differently. BASF, largest chemical company on Earth, is building new facilities in Louisiana and Zhejiang right now. Not planning to, building. That infrastructure will not come back. This is not a pause. This is not a hedge. When you pour concrete in a different country, you're making a 20-year statement about where you believe value gets created. BASF made that statement about Germany. But here's what breaks the simple narrative. BASF is still a German company. Headquarters in Ludwigshafen, German leadership, German shareholders, German intellectual property. So which is it? Is Germany losing its industry, or isn't it? Both, simultaneously. And that's the part nobody explains cleanly. The ownership stays, the production leaves, and for a while, maybe 5 years, maybe 10, that looks fine. Corporate profits hold, tax revenues hold, the brand holds. Germany still looks like an industrial powerhouse because it owns industrial powerhouses. But something is happening underneath that the balance sheet doesn't capture. Manufacturing is not just an activity, it's an organism. The engineers who spend 30 years optimizing a production line don't just have skills, they have judgment that cannot be written down. The suppliers who develop components to exact specifications don't just have contracts. They have institutional knowledge that took decades to build. The vocational schools, the industrial clusters, the daily problem-solving culture that forms when skilled people make complex things together, that's not infrastructure, that's ecosystem. And ecosystems don't wait. When the factories leave, gradually, rationally, one reasonable corporate decision at a time, the ecosystem doesn't stay behind holding a place. It follows, slowly, quietly, in career choices and supplier relocations and R&D centers opening near the new production clusters. America did this. In the 1980s and 90s, manufacturing went offshore. The companies stayed American. The profits stayed strong. The financial sector expanded. For a while, it looked like a clean upgrade. Less making, more designing, more financing, more branding. Then the knowledge followed the factories. Then the innovation followed the knowledge. Then communities that had organized their entire identity around industrial work found themselves with neither the factories nor a coherent replacement. America is still working through what that costs, politically, socially, strategically. Germany is not America in 1985, but the physics are not different. Here's the contradiction that sits at the center of all of this, and almost nobody states it directly. The countries best positioned to win the next industrial era are not the countries with the best industrial history. The Gulf states have structural energy surplus and are building manufacturing capacity from scratch. The United States has cheap gas, an automation edge, and is actively pulling industrial investment back on shore. Parts of the global south are positioning for a future where solar abundance becomes manufacturing competitiveness. Germany, which has the infrastructure, the engineering tradition, the precision culture, is running an energy transition that is, at this exact moment in time, working against it. Most sophisticated industrial base. Worst time transition. That's not bad luck. That's a structural timing problem. And timing problems in industrial capital are uniquely dangerous because capital doesn't wait for the timing to improve. Now here's where it gets genuinely uncomfortable. German electricity prices for industrial users are currently 2 to 3 times higher than comparable costs in the United States. That gap has persisted for 3 years after significant policy response, after major renewable expansion. After the initial crisis, language faded and the coverage moved on. For most industries, a cost disadvantage is a problem you manage. You find efficiencies, you automate, you compete on quality. But for energy-intensive manufacturing, chemicals, steel, aluminum, specialty materials, electricity is not overhead. It goes directly into the product. When your primary input costs 3 times what your competitor pays, you don't have a margin problem. You have a physics problem. And physics doesn't respond to policy announcements. So the optimistic case: Germany fixes its energy system, industrial base recovers, story ends well, rests entirely on one question that nobody can answer with confidence right now. How much ecosystem do you lose while the fix is being built? Because here's the dynamic that makes this genuinely hard to interrupt. Every company that makes the rational decision to relocate makes Germany's remaining industrial ecosystem slightly more fragile for the next company deciding whether to stay. Each departure changes the calculation for everyone still there. Suppliers lose anchor clients. Engineering talent loses career pathways. Industrial clusters thin out just enough that the next wave of companies find the math slightly worse than the wave before found it. Irrational decisions. Compounding damage. This is not decline. This is something more specific and more dangerous than decline. This is a coordination failure in slow motion. The coordination failures at national scale are among the hardest problems in economic policy to interrupt, because the intervention required is faster, larger, and more disruptive than the political system that has to authorize it usually moves. Germany's policymakers know this. The companies know this. The engineering unions know this. The awareness is not the problem. The problem is the gap between the speed at which the problem is moving and the speed at which the response can realistically be organized. That gap is the whole story. Now zoom out, because this is where Germany stops being a Germany story. Every major industrial economy will face some version of this question over the next decade. Japan, South Korea, parts of the American industrial Midwest, regions of China as its demographic structure shifts and its wage advantage erodes and its geopolitical exposure grows. The question is not, is your industrial base strong? Every one of these places has a strong industrial base. The question is, can you transition your energy system fast enough that the industrial base survives the transition with its ecosystem intact? Nobody has answered that question yet. Germany is the first test case, running in real time, right now. And the answer, whichever direction it goes, will be instructive for every economy watching. If Germany navigates this successfully, it tells you something important about what's actually achievable when industrial tradition meets serious policy response. If it doesn't, if the ecosystem thins past the point of recovery while the transition is still being built, it tells you something equally important about how hard this actually is, about how little margin for error the next industrial era allows. Either outcome matters beyond Germany. Either outcome is a data point every serious economy needs. Here's what you should actually be watching. Not the GDP numbers, not the quarterly earnings, not the political headlines. Watch where the engineers go, not the executives, not the capital. The engineers, the people who actually know how to make things at precision scale. Where they build their careers over the next 5 years tells you more about the trajectory of German industry than any policy document or corporate announcement. Because capital follows ecosystems, and ecosystems follow the people who carry the knowledge. If the engineers stay, the ecosystem holds. If they leave, even slowly, even for individually rational reasons, the ecosystem thins in ways that are very difficult to see in real time and very difficult to reverse once visible. That's the metric. That's the signal. Germany didn't fail. Germany exported itself, piece by piece, decision by rational decision. Whether it can import itself back, rebuild the ecosystem faster than it continues to thin, is the most consequential open question in European economic history right now. And here's the thing. You've been thinking about this for the last 9 minutes, and you probably have a view, some sense of which direction this resolves, whether Germany pulls through or whether the erosion wins. But there's one piece of this you haven't heard yet. One variable that changes the calculation in a way that isn't obvious from everything covered here. It doesn't fit in this video. It's the next one. And if the question is still sitting with you, if you're not quite sure your current model of this is complete, that's not an accident. That's the right instinct.